Hello and welcome back to Faith in Haverhill. I'm your host, Rick Harrington, pastor at First Baptist Church in Haverhill. Time to talk about ministry, ethics, and current events, and I'm excited to introduce my next guest, W. David Thomas. So David, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rick. It's a pleasure being here.
That's good to have you. And what does the W stand for?
Walter.
Walter, but you've gone by your middle name.
My dad's name was Walter. My grandfather's name was Walter. My mother, thanks be to God, said, no more Walters. David is just fine.
Okay. And David, you've been a guest on Haverhill Community TV many times, so you may be a familiar face to folks.
I hope so.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family and your background.
Well, I came to Haverhill in 1972. Actually had spent my first years of elementary school in Columbus, Ohio, and then high school in Lexington, Kentucky. And went to college in New York State, back to Kentucky for seminary. Okay. And then interviewed at a number of churches in Ohio, New York, and then finally in Haverhill. They were the first people to take me, so I was only too pleased to come. That was 1972 when I moved to Haverhill.
Okay, all right. And did you grow up in a Christian home, or did you have a conversion?
I did. My dad was a pastor, pastored in Columbus, Ohio, and in Kentucky. He also had a denominational job in New York State for the last part of his ministry. So I was blessed to have not only Christian parents, but I can say godly parents. They lived their faith and were marvelous examples to my brother and I. I had a younger brother who passed away in '93 of cancer. He also was a pastor over in upstate New York. Okay,
all right. So you would be considered what we sometimes call a PK.
I am a PK, pastor's kid. And one of the interesting things about the church that I pastor now in Kingston, New Hampshire, is that we actually have 11 PKs in that congregation,
is that right?
Rick. I have never been associated with a congregation who had such a large number of PKs, and they're all excellent people, very supportive.
Oh, good to hear.
They have great understanding of what it's like to live in a parsonage.
That's good to know, because I got 2 PKs of my own.
They're going to do good.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So you would say you were a Christian from a very young age, maybe don't even remember the age.
No, I had a very clear experience of faith when I was in the first grade, actually, and was attending, like a lot of children did in those days. There was an after-school Bible club that the school bus actually dropped us off at this home. It was kind of like a daycare, after-school daycare, and this lady happened to be a Christian, and one day, she always told us a Bible story. One day she invited children, if they wanted to profess their faith in Jesus. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to declare my allegiance to Jesus Christ. She prayed with me, and while we were praying, actually, my dad came in, and he had tears in his eyes too, because it was an answer to prayer for him and my mom. So I like to think of my life as a pilgrimage, not unlike the long journeys of faith that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob had in the Old Testament. So there have been lots of places along the way where I needed clarification, understanding. I found that the more I know of God, the more I know about me, and consequently the richer and deeper my faith has been, and the living out of that faith in relationship to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I usually look at the age 14 for myself when I came to call myself a Christian, but clearly God was at work well before that, and even at 14, it was very much a development process of thinking
Absolutely.
through stuff. And, yeah. So now, so first grade, you're trusting in Christ, but now the call to ministry. When did you know you wanted to be a pastor?
That didn't happen until my teenage years. Okay. I think I first became exposed to the possibility of that at a summer camp. We went to a church camp, like a lot of young people did in those days, to church camp on Lake Erie, northern Ohio. And I met for the first time people who were serving the Lord in far-flung places, Indonesia, Japan, Kinshasa. I remember one man from Africa, Central Africa, South America. And one of the people speakers that week was very impressive. And it sounded like a grand adventure to me to be able to travel all over the world talking to people about Christ. So that's where it kind of started. It wasn't until I was in college when that was clarified. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I think that sometimes we don't acknowledge the importance of even just a few words that some influential person says to a young person. I'd actually at that point been accepted to journalism graduate school at Syracuse University. I'd kind of moved away from that call, if you will. And I went home at Christmas time, and I was asked to speak spontaneously on the moment on a New Year's Eve by the pastor of the church where my parents were attending. And I was kind of taken off guard. I thought, no time to prepare. So it was very spontaneous. I only spoke for about 6 minutes. But at the end of that, one of the influential men in that church came up to me and he said, not knowing my past, David, I think you ought to consider pastoral ministry. You have an ability with words to communicate. And that changed the next direction of my life. I went to seminary instead of to journalism school.
Wow, excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And you said you went to seminary in Kentucky.
I
was
did.
that Southern?
It was Southern Seminary. It's a Baptist school by heritage. They let a few of us non-Baptists attend, which was nice. Had a great education there. Enjoyed studying and working and preparing. A lot of mentoring happened during that time. They used to call it field work. Now I think they call it mentored ministry, but you work under a mentor of some kind, somebody who has experience. I had a wonderful mentor, a man who had pastored a church in Saigon, Vietnam during the war. He was a great example, had lots of healthy conversations about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just the practicalities of ministry too.
Okay. And so at that point in time, you graduate, and you're not sure whether you want to go back to Ohio or anywhere, but New England isn't. You're not saying I want to go to New England.
New England was nowhere on my screen. I can assure you of that. Okay. I had no history here, no family here. I had never even been to Massachusetts.
Is that right?
So no, it was not on my radar screen. What happened was that a denominational official had a mutual friend, and he sent me a letter and invited me to come to Haverhill. I wrote back and said no.
Okay.
He followed up, and after a couple of churches in New York said no, I said, I've got to find a way to make a living, and so we came over for a weekend, and the end result was that I've said this many times. On that Sunday morning, it was at the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church, which is, I'm sorry to say, no longer in existence, but up on Canosa Avenue. And there were they told me there were 23 people in service that Sunday morning. I'm sure that they counted a dog that ran through the foyer during the offering because there weren't that many human beings there. But when we left to drive back to New York where we were staying that summer, there was no doubt in my mind that there was an attraction here that was palatable, and a few months later, we moved into the parsonage for the church.
Okay, and that was the Haverhill Alliance Church.
That was,
which is right there on 110. Most people are probably familiar with
exactly
the location at this time. But,
yep.
And how many years were you pastoring there, David?
I was there for 17 years till 1989, and in fact, much of what the building looks like today was built during that time, not all of it. We were able to purchase some adjacent properties as the church grew, and but that sanctuary only had pews for 100 people, and that's if they were sitting shoulder to shoulder with no room to spare. Mm-hmm. And in time, God prospered the ministry, I'm pleased to say.
Yes.
and new families came, children came, young people came. And so we bought a couple of adjacent lots and then built the sanctuary that's there today.
Okay, yeah. I meet people all the time who were part of the church during those 17
Oh, is that
years.
right?
Oh, yeah, all the time, yeah. Now, it's part of, you mentioned the Christian and Missionary Alliance denomination. A lot of folks may not be familiar with that denomination. Explain what's the distinctives of that denomination? So.
Well, it's actually quite small in the United States. Mm-hmm. There are many more Christian and Missionary Alliance churches overseas than there are in the United States. It has a history with a Presbyterian pastor who was pastoring in New York City, and felt like that the churches in the mid to late 1800s were not doing enough for taking the gospel overseas. And in his passion for this, he left the Presbyterian church and started a new group. In the beginning, it was called not such a long name. It just had the word missionary. Mm-hmm. And then as it became more of a denomination and less of an association, they added the other words, clumsy to be sure. Mm-hmm. Curiously enough, they had significant events up in Maine at Old Orchard Beach in the summertime, and they would bring Christian speakers from all over the world for a month of services. Some of the people that I met in Haverhill when I first came had actually been to those summer camp meeting style services. But the real distinctive was on missionary service. Mm-hmm. And sending missionaries overseas. Also probably what I would call a healthy rediscovery of the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, the person and work of the Holy Spirit, which I'm grateful for as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was that A.B. Simpson?
It was A.B. Simpson. I should have mentioned his name. You're a genius, Rick.
Well, thank you, David. I don't think it quite fits, but now. So you said the long name Christian Missionary Alliance, sometimes referred to as CMA for short,
exactly.
which is a little more
exactly
not as burdensome.
Or like here in town, the name was just shortened to the Alliance Church.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it took a lot of explaining because a lot of times people not familiar would think that I was representing a cult of some kind. Mm-hmm. And I was happy to explain that we were squarely in the mainstream of Christian faith and doctrinally as well as experientially. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, was that the church you grew up in? You had mentioned.
I did.
Okay.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. Good. Now, you had also referred to the fact that it recently disbanded. The name was changed to Transformation Road, so people may have noticed that. And then recently it disbanded. Was that a tough thing to see for you, David?
You know, I was not prepared for that. Mm-hmm. I knew that in terms of a philosophy of ministry, they had changed the name to Transformation Road. But I remember very clearly the day that I was driving into town, and when I come from New Hampshire, I come down 108 to 110, and I came past the church building, and I saw the sign had been changed. And gosh, I have a lot of wonderful, happy memories associated with that place. Mm-hmm. The parsonage is on the back part of that property, and I remember in '76 when we built that parsonage, and my little family moved into that home where we lived for those years. And I must tell you, Rick, maybe you know more about this than I do because you've talked to some folks, but as my life has been lengthened and I've seen what happens in other congregations, I think the congregational life of the people who were there was rich and deep. There was a lot of love and mutual support, family life. People were engaged with each other. There was a lot of healthy ministry. People were welcomed regardless of their socioeconomic background, racial background, ethnic backgrounds. And so it was, as I look back on it, I look back on it as recognizing how unusual and special it was. People were experiencing what the Apostle Paul said in the New Testament. There's no more rich or poor, male or female, Greek or barbarian, educated, uneducated. We were one in our faith in Jesus Christ, and people were tight with each other. And the building, a lot of that building was built with volunteer labor. Ministry was rich with people who volunteered time and outreach. So, yeah, that was a special time. And when I saw I was pleased. You know, come to think of it, the first sign I saw was a for sale sign.
Oh,
that was
right?
the real
Oh,
hit in the gut. And when I saw that United Granite had rented the building, I was pleased. In fact, the first time I saw that sign, there were some lights on. I stopped and went in and said hello to the people that were there.
Oh, good.
And told them how pleased that I was that Christian people would be using the building. That made me, I recovered a little bit from the shock, if you will.
Good, yes, yeah, yep, good. So currently it's a branch of Granite United Church, which is, I think, based in Salem.
I think
so. It's still a functioning church building at this point.
And these people had been in Haverhill for a while, so even their presence in Haverhill is not entirely new. I remember when they started, I think they rented at the high school first. I hope I'm not giving misinformation.
I think that's true. That's what I've heard
Yeah.
too, yes. Good.
But they're obviously a solid group with keen on outreach, or they wouldn't be growing in the ways they have been.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can rejoice in that for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good. So after 17 years, you transitioned to Bethany Community Services. Did I get that right? Is the terminology?
Yes. So I hadn't been at the church at the Alliance Church long when on a Sunday morning a Reverend Norman Crook showed up in church. I didn't know Norman. But Norman was the executive at Bethany prior to my coming, and he was the executive, and he was looking for board members. And it was kind of interesting because he said to me after the service, "I noticed that unlike a lot of pastors in town, you visit your senior citizens." And that was something I was taught to do. I watched my dad do it. So I had been to Mary Vista several times to visit folks who lived there. We had another lady who lived at Mission Towers. And so he asked me to serve on the board. And I needed to get involved in the community, and it was a great opportunity. I was honored to be asked and then later voted on the board. I served as treasurer a couple of times, a couple of years as president of the board. And then in '89, when I resigned from the church, from the Alliance Church, the board at Norman was transitioning to retirement, and the board asked me to be the successor to Norman Crook. Norman, by the way, was a pastor too. He was a pastor of the United Church of Christ in Bradford, sometimes called the White Church. Yep. And the founder of Bethany, Dr. Dwayne Windemiller, had also been pastor of that church and later a professor at the community college as well. Okay. So that happened in '89. It was a pretty steep learning curve for me. I had not been in business, wasn't in charge of a large staff of people, taking care of properties, interacting with residents and the federal government, because we had a number of federal contracts. So it was a huge change in my life. Yep.
Yeah. And tell us about Bethany Community Services. Those who may not be familiar with what they do here in Haverhill.
So Bethany has a long history, and if I can, I think I should tell you about that. Mm-hmm. Some of your viewers will know Emmaus House on Winter Street, and across the street from their primary location, there's a white house that used to be called Bethany Home. And in the 50s and 60s, several churches in town took the responsibility together of buying that house and of maintaining and supporting one room each to help aged women who didn't have a place to live. In many cases, these women were in fact homeless. At the time, there was no homeless work, ministry, federal programs, but the churches welcomed these women, gave them a place to live. There was a matron who prepared 3 meals a day. And the parlor of that building is where the Haverhill clergy met. Okay. And then in the 60s, along came Lyndon Johnson and his War on Poverty programs. And Dr. Windemiller convinced some of those pastors and a handful of other lay people from the town to form not Bethany Home, but Bethany Homes. And they submitted an application for a grant to the federal government, what was called 202 housing, Section 202 housing. And that was 65. It wasn't until 69 that they got approved for the funding, and construction was started on what today we call Mary Vista, 100 Water Street across from the fire station. 150 apartments there for people who were income as well as age qualified. So the mission of Bethany was to provide housing and social services principally to low or lower income folks. 62 is the minimum age, and there are income restrictions as well. Long before homeless programs were in place, thank God for homeless programs, but we gave a priority to people who were homeless, trying to provide them with a permanent home. So Mary Vista was built. 5 or 6 years later, Mission Towers was built. They were just opening Mission Towers when I moved to Haverhill in 1972. And then a few years later, Phoenix was built right off of Washington Square. We've also developed relationships with a home in Georgetown, a Carlton home, which has outlived its structural usefulness. Those residents were moved to other places a couple of years ago. And we also formed a relationship with the Nichols Trust to help build Nichols Village, which is in Groveland, which reaches a little different socioeconomic group. And we've also have an alliance, a relationship with Boxford Friendship Foundation, which has Friendship Village over in Boxford. So now I haven't added up all of those units, but probably around 600 units of housing, all for seniors at various income levels. And as time has gone along, we expanded our mission to not just provide housing, but realized that the longer people stay independent and in their own apartment, the healthier it is for them. Delay institutionalization helps in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. Spiritual health, mental health, physical health, relationships. And so we have garnered support from our friends and from the federal government programs to provide for people meals, social services, transportation, activities, mental health, those kind of range of services as well. So Bethany's grown a lot since the 60s. When I went in '89, we had about 60 employees. Today, closer to 130, 35 employees. Okay. And obviously the number of units as well. Yeah. And obviously I'm not there any longer. I retired from Bethany. When would that be? About
not
3 years ago now?
3 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. So, and Jared Stewart is the new executive president and CEO, and is younger and has more business experience than I ever did, and is doing a marvelous job.
Good.
So
excellent. He's the first, I think you said the first non-pastor,
he
although
is.
He's a Christian.
He is, yes, in fact, he and his wife are members of our congregation in Kingston. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, they have a great family, four kids. They live in Atkinson, and Jared is very engaged in the Haverhill community, not only with Bethany, but he's a Rotarian, and so that's good too.
Okay. Yeah. And
Succession is important, and I feel very good about that, both for me and Pam Perron attends First Baptist Church.
Financial officer at Bethany.
Right. Bob Penny was our chief financial officer prior, and our ages were similar, Bob and myself, and so the board was very concerned. We put together a succession plan that goes back, 7 years, maybe 8 years now. Mm-hmm. And I think we're all very grateful for how well that has worked out.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent, good. And you know, I would say as a pastor, we've been able to help a lot of folks by pointing to Bethany Homes. So, you know, elder services there, and we've got people into some of the apartments there. So that's been a real blessing for us. It's nice to have Pam, and to, you know, send them to Pam, and that's a nice easy connection there.
That's
but
right.
Yeah, it's really been a blessing to have you guys.
We have a marvelous staff. The overwhelming sense of faith involved in those people. A number of our staff members could have made much more money working for a for-profit, using the trade or the skills that they had, the giftedness they had of God. And there's this intense sense, we say that Bethany is a way of life, not just a place to live. And there's this intense sense of recognizing that these residents are people made in the image of God, and that God loves them and has called us to serve them and to make ourselves servants to them, to let this part of their life, let them thrive. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of great people who are helping do that. So excellent.
And describe your role, David, there. What you were considered president, was that the
right?
So on a day-to-day basis, what kind? Are you doing a lot of fundraising, sort of overseeing staff? I mean, what does a typical day look like? And being president of Bethany Homes, what did it look like?
Yeah, so I would say that my responsibilities were first of all setting the vision and the sense, the nature, the personality of what it was like to be a part of the staff. I learned very quickly that I could not, should not, would not sit in my office and do paperwork all day long, that I needed to be with residents, and I tried my best. I sometimes took a little ribbing for this. I called it walk around, smile a lot.
Okay.
But I tried to get to know people. Not always could I know them by name. There are too many people, but certainly by their face. Spend time in staff members' offices or working with guys at their jobs. I did do a lot of fundraising. A lot of it had to do with federal government compliance issues. Okay. But trying to think 5 years, 8 years, 10 years down the road, how would we be meeting needs, financial and otherwise? I was involved in hiring and staff work. I like to encourage people. I feel like that's one of my gifts. I like to help people reach their highest potential. It sounds maybe to some people braggadocious, but I like to say to people, you know what, I can help you be better. Sometimes I may tell you something that makes you feel initially uncomfortable, but my motivation, I promise, is to help you move forward and improve. Mm-hmm. So that's my goal, and I enjoy doing that. Some of it was developing these relationships with the Friendship Foundation in Boxford or with Nichols Village as well. Okay.
So in some ways, there's a lot of connections, or a lot of your pastoral experience really played into a lot of your role as president.
I like to think that that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And as I say that, I have to be honest and say that my lack of business training made that part of the job a challenge to me. Mm-hmm. And I was grateful that we had some really keen people on our board. Don Beaton was a financial person in Haverhill for a long time, a trustee at one of the big banks. Paul Johnson was a CPA down in Malden. These folks carried me along in that regard and helped me to learn and to anticipate and plan. So, yeah, every gift has a corresponding downside to it. And so when you find your gift, then you need to find people who can help you be supported at the place where your weaknesses are. So,
absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah.
So you decided to go back into pastoral ministry. You kind of referred to it. About 3 years ago, you decided to step aside from Bethany Homes and go back into pastoral ministry.
So the story's actually longer than that.
Okay.
So from '89 into the late '90s, I was I never left pastoral ministry per se. I did a lot of pulpit supply. That means a church filling in for pastors who were on vacation, or maybe the pastor had moved away, gone on to another position. So I traveled around New England doing retreats, summer speaking engagements, speaking in churches from New Jersey, New York, Maine, New Hampshire. When my brother was dying of cancer over in New York, I drove a lot of weekends to New York and filled the pulpit for him at a rather large church that he pastored there. But long story short, in about 96, 97, the First Congregational Church in Kingston was without a pastor. The announcement was made to the congregation that they were seeking somebody and to do pulpit supply. One of the families from the Alliance Church had moved to Kingston. They heard this announcement. They said, "Why don't you call up David Thomas?" So the first Sunday in 1997, I went there to pinch hit, if you were, for them. And after the service, a couple of the deacons said, "If we needed somebody in the future, would you be available?" And I said, "Well, I have some engagements, but yeah, let's look at our calendars." And so in 97, probably 20 times I was in Kingston.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And at the end of that year, somebody said to me, "You know, we're not supposed to solicit applications, but if you were to apply, some of us would like it." And I said, "Well, I'm committed to my responsibilities at Bethany." And they said, "Well, maybe you could do this part-time." I'd never thought of that. Although Norman Crook was part-time in Second Congregational Church in Boxford after he left First Church here and while he was at Bethany. So long story short, we arranged a position. Like the true New Hampshire Yankees they were, they came up with a new title for me. I was called Pastor of Defined Duties, which basically meant I showed up on Sunday and conducted worship for a congregation of 75 to 100 people. I also did some leadership training along the way. The church grew. We had a couple of retreats. We added some other part-time staff. And then, as you said correctly, 3 years ago when I left Bethany, I left Haverhill and Bethany behind me and have been, I'm not full-time, but it's hard for a pastor not to work full-time, regardless of how much the time came out. We have an associate pastor, Shay Fitzgibbons, who is ordained a graduate of Gordon Conwell, and we have two other staff people in the office. We have a couple of people on music staff, and a woman who heads our children's ministry too. So there are lots of people who are augmenting my weaknesses still to this day. But yeah, that's what I'm doing now, pretty much full time.
Okay, all right. And you guys have 2 locations.
We do. It's not nearly as exciting as Granite United, or United Granite. I'm sorry if I misspoke. But there was a vacant church building in Newton. Just up 108, and our congregation voted to, I say purchase, but it was basically $1 to take over the building as long as we used it for church services. Okay. And so we started a service on Saturday night, and it hasn't grown as quickly as we hoped, frankly. But we have a congregation of 50 to 75 on Saturday night, 60 people. And it's a lot more informal, kind of mixture of contemporary and traditional music. But it's been a good presence, and new people have come, and for that we're grateful. By the way, we were just voted by the people of Newton the best place to worship. Oh, is that in Newton. So I'm not sure that the caveat on Saturday night was in there too. Maybe, I don't know. I was shocked when I read it in the paper. But anyway, we're pleased for the publicity.
Okay. And the idea of churches having multiple locations has become more popular. You mentioned Granite United. So do you preach at both? Is that how you do it?
I
David?
do.
Okay.
The musicians are all different. And I know a lot of these places that are much more successful, bigger at it than we are, use simulcast of one kind or another, or maybe video. We haven't done that. So I do. I preach on Saturday night. The service is at 5 o'clock. And then on Sunday morning we have a service at 8:45 and a second service at 10:30. So it's the same teaching concept, content, but it's people sometimes who visit one or the other services, or maybe even go to more than one service for some reason on a weekend, will tell you that the presentation is different because it's a different dynamic. The space is different, the number of people is different, and so you know from your speaking history that it just creates a different level of interaction between yourself. And I like that informal teaching kind of, and sometimes even interacting with people during the sermon, which you probably wouldn't typically experience in a more traditional service of some kind.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's 4 C's? Is that 4 C's?
We are not 4 C's. So you're bringing up the subject of the fact that there are several different branches of Congregational Association. West Church here in Haverhill is 4 C's. Park Street in Boston. There are a number of other 4C congregations around. We are associated with the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches.
Okay.
So it's about the same size as the 4 C's, a little different, but the same congregational style of government. Worship services, you wouldn't notice too much difference, frankly.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay.
And I'm of an evangelical theological bent, so I have a lot of affinity for the 4 C's. Shay, our associate pastor, was actually ordained in the 4 C's group. Yeah.
Yeah, those two denominations seem to have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yep.
Good. Well, David, I want to transition a little bit and to ask you a number of questions on leadership, because you've had a long history of leadership, both in the local church and in business as well. So a number of different questions, and
you're not going to stump me, are you?
We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But some of these might be short answers, some may be a little longer. But a common question people ask, and your thoughts on, are leaders born or are they trained?
Oh, I like that argument. I think that leadership is related to your giftedness. And so some people might say that in that respect, they're born. But we are all leaders. We're all leaders. Mothers, fathers are leaders. Whatever business you're in, you may have responsibility for only a couple of people, or you may be leading dozens of people. But everybody's a leader. So the best thing we can all do is understand that leaders can be trained. Whatever gift you started out with, you can advance your skills. You can sharpen the tools in your toolbox, is the old analogy. And I have found recently there's more available, especially to people in churches. There's many more resources available to people now than there were when I was just starting out. You may be familiar, Rick, with the Leadership Summit that is broadcast from Willow Creek. And I have found a lot of help. But a lot of the people who go to those leadership seminars are not pastors. They don't have big titles in corporations or whatever, because there's just a lot to be learned about relating. Curiously, one of the things that has most impacted me recently is the whole subject of candor, of being transparent, of being willing to embrace your weaknesses, to be honest about them. And I think that these big national seminars in the beginning tried to emphasize success, success, success. And I think they were missing something, and more recently, more of them books. There's an excellent book entitled Humilitas. I encourage people because it encourages people to be honest with themselves, to be candid, to be transparent, not to be afraid of letting people know who may be your employees or your staff people that you have weaknesses too, that you have things in your past that have been the source of shame. I think that people are able to identify so I've gone way past your initial question, but the point is that whether we're born with giftedness with regard to leadership, we all need to sharpen our skills, and those are skills that can be learned. Time management, how to relate to people, how to gain people's confidence, building team spirit. Those are all skills that people can learn and should learn.
Mm-hmm. Good. Let's see. What leaders have influenced you? That could be somebody on the larger scale people have heard of, maybe, or maybe personally, some people who have influenced you, David.
Wow. Leaders who have influenced me. I would be mistaken if I didn't mention my dad. Dad never ran a big corporation. He never pastored a big church. But his giftedness, his concern for people, I think that's where that walk around, smile a lot thing came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That Dad cared about individuals. He wanted to know your name, where you came from, how you got to where you are, how could he encourage you. So that was a big impact on my life. That pastor in Louisville, Kentucky, who was a pastor in Saigon, had sharp management skills. I learned time management from a man whose name I can't call to my mind at the moment, but he came to a pastor seminar that I was in, and he talked about how pastors waste a lot of their time, and he talked about building a schedule. He encouraged us to plan our time with goals, with kind of weekly or daily missions. He taught us to he encouraged us to get in a rhythm for your day and for your week, so that certain days were for study, certain times of the day were for visitation, to be aware of time when you go to visit people, to sit in their house or at the hospital. Those kind of skills served me very well, not only in the pastorate, but at Bethany, where you're constantly, people are wanting more of your time, and there are deadlines involved. I have benefited from those Willow Creek conferences too. I can't think of one person in those seminars who has influenced me more than others, but they have all been helpful.
Okay, excellent. Good.
Sorry, no more names, Rick.
That's good. That's a good start. So, how about this one here? What has been your biggest challenge as a leader, and how did you handle it, David?
Well, I would say, and I'm going to be candid, I'm going to say being disappointed with myself or other people is the biggest challenge. Those disappointments lead to leaders being discouraged. You feel like, keyword feel, that may not be true, but you feel like that you're not being as successful or not reaching your goals as much. I think that this is a danger to pastors in particular. And if people are watching who are lay leaders in a church, I would urge you to be careful about encouraging pastors. Pastors are easily targets for criticism, and And pastors recognize their failures probably before people in the congregation recognize the failures. They put incredibly high, sometimes unreasonable expectations on themselves. So I can remember coming to the Alliance Church in 1972 and living in that little tiny parsonage and hearing about other pastors in town with having 100 or 200 or 500 people and trying to live from paycheck to paycheck, $50 a week. And standing in front of the mirror, shaving in the morning and saying, gosh, how long do I have to stay here? And I'm thankful that other people recognized that temptation on my part and encouraged me to hang in there. I remember a professor at Gordon, I was doing the training for mentored ministry over there, and he said, you're going to have to spend at least 7 years in the same church in New England to affect any positive change whatsoever.
Wow.
And I remember coming home and saying, okay, if that's what it takes, I'll do it. I years later wrote my doctoral thesis on being effective in the long tenured pastorate. If life hadn't pressed in upon me, I'd have been happy to be the pastor of the Alliance Church here in Haverhill for my entire career. I think that it is possible for pastors to be effective for long periods of time, and those relationships that are built, trust, you don't gain trust in a minute or two. And you need to distinguish between personal trust and corporate trust. Well, lots of times when a person is called to be a pastor of a church, they're desperate. They think this new guy is going to solve all their problems. All the things that last guy did wrong, he's going to correct.
He's going to fix it, yeah.
And he'll fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So corporate trust is very high. Expectations are high. Personal trust is very low. They don't know this man. Will he use my mistakes as sermon fodder, illustrations? Will my mistakes become stories that everybody else hears? But over time, those two things cross, and personal trust grows, and corporate trust declines. And when they cross, that's kind of like a pregnant moment, and you want to set in place strategies that will maintain that balance between personal trust and corporate trust. And people do that. They can achieve that. And it puts off this discouragement that otherwise is that threatens, and doesn't just threaten pastors. I'm sure that school teachers have the same kind of experience when they feel like they're not connecting with their pupils, or some of them don't perform up to standards, or whatever the case may be. It happens to all of us.
Sure. Maybe related to that, David, how do you keep from burning out? So you've been in leadership for a long time. A lot of times, like you said, there are days where you almost feel like quitting. How do you keep from burning out as a leader?
So this obviously is a huge issue for those of us who like to stay one place for a long time, because what often happens is that somebody burns out in one place, and that burnout is evident to other people, and so they go someplace else. So a pastor has 4 years worth of sermons, and they preach those 4 years worth of sermons 6 or 8 times in 6 or 8 different churches, rather than being successful and effective over time. So there's a couple of really important strategies. You want to make sure that you are taking care of your personal health, mental health, spiritual health, physical health. In one of those times when I was tempted, I started riding a bicycle, and to this day, riding a bicycle 150, 175 times a year helps me clear my mind. It's part of I don't ride with other people. I'm the lonesome bike rider because it's healthy for me to do that. For other people, they do other things, but that taking care of your health is an important thing, and your spiritual health. Pastors especially need to be in places where somebody is speaking spiritual, biblical truth into their lives. They're giving out all the time. So annual retreats of some kind, sometimes personal, private retreats, sometimes spiritual retreats where other people are speaking. Learning new skills is a very important. I think that developing family life, making sure that you're seeing different places. Churches ought to plan for pastors to have sabbaticals so that they can have whatever length of time the church can afford, but whether it's 2 months or 5 months or longer, so that part of that would be study, part of it's just travel, experiencing other places, visiting other churches. At one point in time, I was at the church in Haverhill, and the church gave me time, and for 4 months, I worshiped in a different large church around New England every Sunday and interviewed the pastor, had an hour. Obviously, it took planning to set this up, but I worshiped in their services and then got to talk to that pastor for an hour afterwards to try to learn from their experience. Those are the kinds of things I think that are helpful. But everybody can burn out, so pacing yourself, learning your own to set personal boundaries, and and it changes with time too. I'm nearly 70 years old. I've recognized that my energy level is not what it was when I was 35. I can't expect myself to do that. I can be honest about what I'm able to do today. Does that?
It does,
are those things helpful?
Oh, that's excellent. Yes, thank you, David. In fact, maybe think of, you had mentioned the summit. Bill Hybels tells the story. He's the pastor who heads up the summit, where he was getting close to burnout and went to see get some counseling help. And the counselor said, "Well, do you have any hobbies?" "No, I don't have any hobbies." And he said, "Well, any hobbies from your childhood?" He said, "I like to sail, but I can't be a pastor who sails because people will talk about that." And the counselor wisely said, "You can either be the pastor that everybody talked about how you burned out and tragically ended your ministry, or you can just deal with the fact that people say, okay, he's a pastor who does sailing." So I think just the idea of when you talked about bicycling, reminded me of the idea of having some even physical, exercise or something that's getting you away from the office and away from things and keeping you.
I think bicycling is much more likely to be in the expense category that is reasonable for the pastors that you and I know.
Probably,
that the sailing,
yes, yeah.
But I understand Bill Hybels had some resources beyond himself that helped him with that as well too.
Sure.
But the principle applies to all of us,
That's
no
right.
matter how little or how large our financial resources are, for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think reasonable expectations. So I'm always concerned when the summit comes around that some of these younger pastors go to the summit and they come to believe intuitively, without anybody actually saying it, that if they don't reach the status of Bill Hybels or somebody comparable to him, somebody with 8 campuses and crowds of 1,000 and television programs, that somehow that makes them ineffective or not successful. And I remember a counselor in my seminary years telling me that I had high expectations for myself, and that was fine, but I needed to be careful about imposing those high expectations on other people, and to be reasonable about the expectations for myself, because unreasonable expectation sets us up for failure as well.
Good. A question about, and you've already touched on this earlier in the interview, succession and knowing when it's time to step aside from leadership and the importance of training up other leaders.
So I hope nobody from Kingston is watching this, because there's a lot of nervousness in Kingston, because in January will turn 70. I'm very grateful for the great relationship I have with the people there. Mm-hmm. But the elders of that congregation and I have already started working on a succession plan. Frankly, right now, I don't know when it will be. I don't want it to happen as a surprise. I don't want it to happen as an emergency. One of the things that succession planners emphasize is that every congregation, every business for their key leader ought to have an emergency succession toolbox, because health issues, accidents happen, and people need to be prepared even in that regard. But there ought to be a plan in place. I am clear about the fact that my leaving the Alliance Church happened quickly and without a plan, and I take responsibility for that, not anybody else there. I learned from that when I was at Bethany, and so long before I intended to leave, we started interviewing, planning, thinking about what it'd be, and then Jared and I were able to work together.
Seems very wise.
It was such a healthy time. As I've said to other places, I had built trust with a lot of people, not just trust here in Haverhill, but with people in the federal government, people who worked with foundations. And that loyalty, that trust needed to be over time transferred away from me to Jared. And they needed to know him and know that he would be trustworthy. And the same thing is true now as we're thinking about this at First Congregational Church in Kingston. Those people need to be to have the confidence that as time goes along, there will be other people brought on staff. I think the first steps of that are when they come to trust Shay Fitzgibbons, our associate pastor. They recognize that I'm not threatened by his expertise. He's got a long background in hospice and hospital chaplaincy. He's a great counselor in those regards. That's not a gift that I have. My wife says that she hopes that when I grow up, I'm as compassionate as Pastor Shay is. But when you hire somebody like that and they recognize that I'm not threatened, that he is trustworthy, that he has gifts that are strengthening our congregation, and that we work together as a team, I think that helps too. But over time, they need to know that there's a plan in place, that everything is safe, that we're thinking long term, not just short term, and that good can come out of this, and not to be afraid of the future.
That's good. Well, we're coming towards the end here, David, but
okay.
I wanted to do one sort of last general question. What advice would you give to a younger leader, younger pastor like myself, or a younger leader in general? Any other, just some thoughts maybe in a general way?
I have two big things that I think pastors ought to be engaged in doing. If all else fails, they should study hard and know their congregation. That requires being with the people, and it requires having time by yourself. Pastor's time is taken in a multitude of administrative kind of tasks. I say find other people who have those gifts and empower them, let them run. If you're in a congregational church, it's actually good, because that's what congregationalism is supposed to do. It's supposed to let the lay people lead. And so I try to discipline myself to not let other things take time away from my study. I plan my sermon schedule a year in advance, and so I know what's coming up, and I can, as I see articles or reviews or illustrations come to my mind, I can kind of file those away, and I'm prepared. But Mondays and Tuesdays, not Saturday night. If I wait till Saturday night, it's too late in Kingston, because I got to go to Newton at 5 o'clock, and people are expecting me to have a lesson to teach. But yes, to set that time aside and to work diligently at it, and then to be with people where they work, where they live, in the hospital, the nursing home. Make their surroundings, become familiar with them, and know their children, know their names. What do they do? What are they afraid of? What are they longing for? That helps to take your study and to make it personal for the people who are actually sitting in front of you, hoping to hear a word from the Lord. That's what the old Congregationalists used to ask the pastor, When they arrived, they would say to the pastor, Jonathan Edwards or whoever it might be, is there a word from the Lord? And I ask myself that question before I preach every weekend. This is not David Thomas. I hope to the best of my ability to represent God himself. It sounds audacious, does it? Mm-hmm. But he has given us his word, and as long as I'm true to the word of God and to his son, Jesus Christ, who was incarnate in the flesh, lived, died, and was raised again, I can convey the love, the mercy, the grace of God to the people who are sitting there. Give them hope.
Amen. Amen. Well, David, I feel like I could talk to you for another hour here, but it is time to close up. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and just a real blessing to talk to you. So,
thank you.
And I want to thank you to our viewing audience. Thanks for tuning in to Faith in Haverhill. We usually shoot a new show every month. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, we're always looking to hear back from our viewers. Just contact me at rick@fbchaverhill.org. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye now.